Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Alina Islam, and I'm a mining analyst here at Red Cloud Securities. I'm very pleased to introduce Ion Energy to you today, a lithium explorer with two brine projects in Mongolia and a hard rock project in Canada. For the webinar today, we have with us Ali Haji, CEO and Director. Ali will provide an introduction to the company, including an overview of activities underway at the Urgak Naran Lithium Brine Project and ION's most recent acquisition of the Bliss Lake Lithium Pegmatite Project in Canada. After the presentation, we'll take your questions live. Please send us your questions via the chat box, and we'll get through as many as we can. Before we get started, though, I do need to mention the disclosures. For Ion Energy, there may be some forward-looking statements made on this call. I would direct listeners to the cautionary note on page 2 of the Ion Energy corporate presentation located on the company's website. For Red Cloud Securities, I would highlight that this webinar is for information purposes only and should not be considered a solicitation to purchase or sell securities or a recommendation to buy or sell securities. We note that this call does not take into account the particular situation or needs of individual investors. Participants should rely on their own investigations and seek their own professional advice before investment. Please see our most recent research located on our website for Ion Energy specific disclosures. With that, Ali, I'll hand it over to you. Please take it away.
Thank you, Alina, for that introduction. And need to move a bit here. Just back up a bit. As Alina mentioned, I am the Chief Executive and Director of Ion Energy. It's a company that I co-founded back in 2017 with the vision of looking at lithium in Mongolia. But more importantly, looking for lithium in jurisdictions or locales and geographies where the mineral is most required. So, for instance, in Asia today, China is the largest importer of lithium in the world. However, they go to LATAM and Australia for their requirements. So finding something in Mongolia was what really built the ethos of this organization. Forward-looking statements as indicated by Alina, so they're available on our website, but I'll skip over those. Today, Ion Energy is the first mover in the brine space in Mongolia. We have an additional asset that has a bit more work to be done to better understand it in Mongolia as well. We started exploration at two of our assets, with one undergoing desktop exploration activities today. And of course, with the acquisition of the Northwest Territories, we're now building a global lithium portfolio. In aggregate, we have about 115,000 hectares under control of Ion Energy. We started the company in 2017, a time at which the lithium cycle was at its tail end. Folks like Namaska had sort of slowly disappeared into the woodwork. But we found that to be an opportunity. We saw lithium as a cyclical element, much like everything else. And of course, the clean green energy revolution that's currently taking place has made it more than just a cyclical requirement. It is a requirement that will help fuel the electrification of our transportation needs as we move forward as a society. A bit about the team. I've had about 13 years of asset management experience at Invesco in various capacities over Toronto, Hong Kong, and London. I'm an advisor to various other mining companies, as well as sit on the board of a couple of other mining companies as well. My father's been in mining for the last 4 decades in Zambia, so I guess you could say it runs in the blood. Matthew Woods, our chairman, he's a serial mining entrepreneur, a Rio Tinto Gold Scholar geologist, so an individual that really knows his rocks as well as he knows how to build companies for sufficient exits. His more recent exit was the sale of Avanco Resources, of which he was founding chairman, to Oz Minerals in March 2018 for about 440 million Aussie. He had a very significant exit in Mongolia back in 2011, 2012, where he sold a coal company for about $500 million. And that really set the foundation for us to look at Mongolia as a jurisdiction in which we can operate. Wendy Lee joined the company about 1.5 years ago. She's an ex-Noble Group employee where she worked on commodities trades between China and Mongolia. It's important that our jurisdiction, Mongolia being so close to China, we do have presence in China, and Wendy fills that need. She's also the primary liaison between strategics in Asia and the company. Bata Tumarocher is one of our 2 Mongolian nationals as on our board. He is the chief executive of Step Gold, a current gold producer in Mongolia, of which Matthew Wood is also the chairman. But he's also an advisor to the Ministry of Mines. He was with the prior government. He was reappointed with the new government, so we are politically agnostic in country. We tend to get things done irrespective of which party is at the helm of the cabinet or parliament. Anil Varach is our investment banking professional, an ex-Dundee Goodman banker, having raised over $1 billion on various transactions, and also sits on the board of other mining companies as well. And Tushin Kishik Surin is our exploration geologist in country. He is a Mongolian national. He's had over 30 years of experience in geology, but he also has a team of geologists as well as the necessary equipment required for us to be successful in country. The bottom row is really where I want to highlight our lithium experience. John McVicker is our CFO. We're happy to have him. He was a partner at EY. But then the next five individuals are really where the lithium experience should speak to this audience. Paul Fornazzari was the original chairman of Lithium Americas. He was a founding director of Neo Lithium, and being the head of LATAM at Fasken, was the lawyer on file that sold Neo to Zijin for about $1 billion 14 months ago. He's also on the board of Idaho Champion. So an individual that's very much considered a pioneer in the lithium space for the Americas. Don Haynes is our lead technical advisor. He's the individual that wrote the very first 43-101 for lithium companies on the TSX, and then wrote the guideline document that everybody else in the lithium space has to follow in order to list a lithium company on the TSX. He's been to site 3 times, and he continues to be a pivotal member of our team. He's also an advisor to LRC, which is Lithium Royalty Corp, a Warta-backed vehicle that went public about 6 weeks ago at $1 billion market cap. And he's also an advisor to one of our neighboring companies in the Northwest Territories by the name of Lift Power, about 360 million market cap there as well. Dr. Hashbat Dashtitsaren is our in-country PhD hydrogeologist, a skilled individual in his own right. He's the individual that helped us find the assets that we have in country, but also works alongside Don to execute those exploration programs in country. Dr. Mark King was the QP on file at Neo Lithium before it sold to Zijin about 14 months ago, as I mentioned, an individual that has worked for the likes of Lithium Americas, Albemarle, and Neo, amongst others. He's also been on site once last year in April. Dr. David Deek is more on the supply chain side, so an individual that brings a wealth of knowledge with respect to where supply is required. He was at Lithium Americas, and then he was at Tesla, where he helped build Gigafactory 1 in Nevada. So we assembled a very strong team early on before we went out looking in Mongolia's direction. And Mongolia tends to be a country that most don't have too much knowledge about, and that's because for a couple of reasons. One, it's halfway across the world, and two, it's a very young democracy that has a budding and growing mining environment that is now being paid attention to by the likes of Rio Tinto, amongst others. We've been there about 13, 14 years now as a group, I should say. My chairman's first foray into Mongolia was the setup of a company called Hunu Coal with a $20 million IPO on the ASX that ultimately led to a $500 million exit to Banpu of Thailand within 18 months. And that was really a consolidation play. So figure out what assets can fall under this coal boom today, and then ultimately exit to somebody that would bring them to production. We went back in 2016 when I joined this group, and we acquired ATO from Centerra Gold in 2018. That was the only mining IPO on the main board of the TSX, and it came to production, or first gold pour, in March 2020 at the height of the pandemic, using 100% Mongolian staff. So when Matt exited Hunu, he had 350 employees and only 3 expats. Step Gold today has 350 employees and only 1 expat. So you have enough skilled labor in country to get things done. Rio Tinto, of course, runs the Oyu Tolgoi mine there. They consolidated Turquoise Hill shares about a couple of months ago here. And that ultimately led to about an $8 billion investment by a global major looking at Mongolia and looking at Mongolia very closely. With Ion Energy, what we're doing is trying to mirror the successes of Hunukol, which is a consolidation opportunity of the various assets in country that are lithium focused. We were first movers. Today, Sinomine and a couple others are now looking at lithium assets, including a European major. But with Step Gold, we've also shown that we can build a mine in a country that most don't quite understand, and we're able to bring something to production using 100% Mongolian staff. So Ion Energy's focus in Mongolia today is sort of a hybrid of the 2 approaches. One is consolidate land, bring them to inferred and measured and indicated resources, prove that resource potential, and then either JV with the strategic to bring them to production, or exit entirely from those with those assets. Our asset that we went public on is Balvayul. It's 81,000 hectares, about 60 kilometers by 20 kilometers for a sense of scale, roughly 5 times the size of Vancouver. Located 23 kilometers from the Chinese border, we do require Chinese approval to actually visit the asset. That's how close it is to that border. Each of those green spots that you see on your screen there are actual gigafactories producing as many batteries as that one facility in Nevada that Tesla currently has or currently had at the time. Tesla, of course, is also in China, just outside of Shanghai. But the demand is there, and of course, our proximity cannot be beat. Historical work done on Bavayol showed grades of about 426 ppm average, maximum grade 8 to 11 ppm. Those are some images of us on site back in April last year. The ratios for the impurities to potassium, magnesium, calcium, sodium, and boron were all rather low as well, relative to what you might find in Qinghai, about 1,500 kilometers southwest of where we're located in China. But it is the Gobi Desert. It is a very arid environment. It's relatively flat compared to the Atacama or the Puna, where you have to traverse significant elevation and altitude to get your assets, let alone quite difficult terrain. We started a drilling program shortly after we went public in August 2020 at the height of the pandemic. But of course, Mongolia, much like the rest of the world, was under lockdown. And being first movers in the lithium space, we opted to use a very conservative program that was 222 auger holes across the entire asset base. And of course, given the size of the license, you can expect that that's a few holes, few and far between, but it gives you a good sense of what you have the capacity to find. We had grades of up to 1,502 ppm return during that auger program. Exciting for us because it's almost double the 811 seen historically. But we also found a copper and nickel discovery that's rather significant at 1,252 ppm copper and 494 nickel. Copper and nickel, of course, are both used for batteries alongside lithium. And finding these on our asset was really a freebie. It's not what we were going after. Yes, we know Mongolia is the home of big copper with Oyu Tolgoi, but this is a way for us to monetize other commodities found on this rather significant asset. About two and a half years ago, we acquired Urgath Naran. This was our second acquisition in Mongolia. It's located in Dorngovi province. Dorngovi is a very significant province from an infrastructure perspective in Mongolia. There is a high-speed rail link leading into China here. You're close to the national grid. In fact, so much so that at the bottom of our basin that I'll show you in just a second here, we're only located about 7 kilometers from the closest town that's connected to that grid. We went out to site in April of last year, a time that the country had finally opened up to foreign travel, and we were able to get out. Myself, Don, and Mark. We walked our assets, and you can see there the salars are very similar to what you would expect to find in the Atacama. And we collected a brine sample on surface at 918 milligrams per liter. So that's world class, whichever way you slice it. But we are cognizant that it may be in an evaporation pond, a natural evaporation pond that ultimately has concentrated that brine. But being interested by that grade that we found, we set up an exploration camp in country, and that's what you see on your screen here right now. The bottom picture there is myself, Don, Mark, and Enki, and just some commentary from Mark where he draws parallels between what he's seen in Mongolia versus what he's seen in either Nevada or the South American salars. Following that 918 milligrams per liter survey or assay, we opted to do a 100 line kilometer geophysics program across that entire basin. This is very typical for junior miners in the brine space to understand what's beneath surface, where the low resistivity is and where the potential for lithium is. So the likes of Alpha Lithium, Arena Minerals, Lithium Chile, etc., would have had to have gone through this process to get to an inferred resource. 100 line kilometers is a significant program. Of course, we found resistivities that were very encouraging, as low as 0.2 ohm, and at 6.5 ohm, we had 22.7 billion cubic meters. At half an ohm cutoff, we had 9.9 billion cubic meters. So those numbers are relevant, and I'm sure I'll have questions around those during Q&A, so I won't dig too deep into that just yet. But the volumes that we've seen thus far were highly indicative of an asset that has the potential to come to production. The next step in the program was, of course, to drill lithological as well as water wells. And so we drilled our 3 diamond holes across the entire asset base. Each of those holes was situated about 2 kilometers apart. We've shown grades there of about 320 ppm lithium over 100 meter intercepts on all 3 holes on average. For some comparison purposes, if you look at Albemarle Silver Peak in Nevada, that is the only operating brine asset in North America today. Their average grade was 121 ppm. So we're almost 3 times greater than the only operating brine asset in North America today. The water, that's some of the equipment that we had on site. So the water well rig on the left and the diamond core drill on the right. We've now completed our hydrogeological holes. We had to wait till the weather warmed up to complete them. But the team has been out there once already. They've done some airlift testing. They've done some porosity testing, as well as taken some readings from the level loggers and the piezometer. The next step in the process is the obtaining of the brine samples that can be assayed, which will allow us to come to an inferred resource. So the team will be redeploying and putting camp in site on June 7th for that work. And of course, we'll report those results out to market as and when they're available. The intent is still to provide the market with an inferred resource calculation before the end of June this year. So we've talked about Mongolia, and we've sort of touched on the specific importance of being close to jurisdictions that matter and that will require lithium. And we've seen now that, of course, Canada in the Northwest Territories, in Quebec, and as well in Ontario are gaining a lot of traction with respect to the potential for lithium. And so when we saw this asset about 4 weeks ago, it was brought to us by an individual that had staked the land. We were very quick to react and look to acquire it. The historical drilling or historical sampling in the region showed us grades of 1.4% with almost 39 million ton lithium oxide. So very exciting numbers from that regard. We now control the Bliss Lake project, which is 5,700 hectares, contiguous land, located very close to Yellowknife, as well as our peers. And our peers, for that matter, are PMET, a company with $1 billion market cap. Lift Power up here with the market cap about $360 million. And Lift Power will start to drill this summer. So exciting things happening in that jurisdiction. We were very quick to acquire this at a very low cost to our shareholders. And that ultimately has minimized dilution, but has also provided us with an asset that will give us a potential upside in the realms of our peers that are in and around our neighborhood. So as a company today, around 62 million shares out, so still relatively tight, 25% in the hands of management and insiders. We've never sold a share. We've continued to buy on market, and we've participated in every financing. We have warrants that were issued at 70 cents. Those were part of a bought deal completed by PI and Stifel over 2 years ago, about two years and almost 2.5 years ago now was the last time we raised money. Every issuance of options has always been at a price higher than that of the prior issue, fully diluted around 77. And I believe today our share price is about 28, 29, which puts our market cap at about 17 million Canadian. So a very small market cap despite the amount of assets that we have, and of course, how quickly we've advanced them. And that's where we see fair opportunity. We've been very quick with respect to our execution. In 21, we acquired the Urgaknaran asset. We completed our bought deal. We've put together a very strong team, including our director in Asia. We've done a fair bit of work bringing Urgaknaran from April last year for us having set foot on the asset for the very first time to now in June, an inferred resource calculation in the span of 14 months. So an extremely rapid growth plan there. And of course, now that we've acquired the Canadian project at Bliss Lake, the goal there is for us to roll up our sleeves, which we're currently doing, looking at satellite imagery and identifying targets for us to go out and conduct exploration activities over the course of this summer. As of course, the window for exploration is quite small for this stage of exploration is quite small in the Northwest Territories. The goal for us would be to ensure that we have a path to beginning our pre-feasibility study on Urgaknaran before the end of this year. But of course, measured and indicated resources in Q3 would be a very exciting catalyst for us to share with market that we believe will give us a significant re-rate. From a comp table perspective, I think the entire market today will tell you that they're undervalued. Unfortunately, we have that sole distinction of being the lowest valued lithium company out there. We look at some of our peers. We talk about Alpha Lithium, for instance, with 2 assets, inferred resource of about 2.1 million ton LCE, trading at about $165 million market cap today. So the Mongolia discount exists, and it exists in a big way. But this is something that we will look to change quite rapidly when we have that 43-101 inferred and then ultimately measured and indicated resource identified. So that's ultimately the ION story in about 20 minutes or so. Some of the key catalysts that we have, of course, are the inferred resource. We're going to start to do a fair bit of work here in Canada to help advance our asset there. Hopefully, I've shown you the team is an experienced team, and we've got the necessary skill set to advance these assets. And given our proximity to these major markets, we believe we're well positioned to provide shareholder value. So I'll stop there, and Alina, happy to open up to questions.
All right, thanks a lot, Ali. That was a great presentation. So, just as a reminder to our audience, you can type your questions into the chat box at any time. So, Ali, we do have a couple of questions. Let's start with Bliss Lake. So, can you talk about the rationale for making this acquisition? Could it be considered a pivot away from Mongolia?
No, no, absolutely not. I think, Mongolia, we've seen a lot of promise. We've seen investors step into that region with the likes of Sinomine, and Sinomine is, of course, invested in Tanko, or they own Tanko here in Canada. They own Bikita in Zimbabwe. They know lithium, they know it well, and now they're deploying capital to Mongolia. When we started this company, we said we want to be close to the end user of lithium, so that we're not traversing 15,000 nautical miles on the back of bunker burning ships from LATAM or Australia to provide the Chinese with the necessary lithium that they require. Similar sort of ideology with respect to Canada. We were advancing Mongolia rapidly. We're seeing world-class results there, but Canada has now the potential to provide lithium to North America in particular. And with everything that we're seeing happening in that region, with all the consolidation opportunities as well as the investment that's going there, for the price that we found Bliss Lake coming across our desk, which, as I mentioned, was not dilutive to the existing shareholders in any significant manner, it was sort of too good of an opportunity to pass up. And this now puts us on path to be in jurisdictions whereby demand will be required, and we have the opportunity to reduce that sort of time to market with respect to where our assets are and where that commodity will be required.
Okay, all right. So, just to follow up on that, Ali, could you speak about Dawn's influence on this acquisition?
Yeah, I mean, Don and I have known each other now for over 3 years, I suppose, maybe longer. And as part of the plan for ION, we've always wanted to acquire more assets and consolidate ideas. And I'd say, Don, having experience in the Northwest Territories with Lift Power, was a big sort of indicator to us that, let's approach Don, see what he thinks about this asset. And his immediate response was, this looks interesting, it's worth considering. And for an individual that has lived 74 short or long years, I should say, but an extremely hardworking individual that knows lithium better than most, to have him sort of give it its blessing and giving us its blessing and telling us that it's of interest at the cost that we acquired it. I think we've done well for our shareholders, and the fruits of that acquisition are yet to be determined.
So, any exploration that's occurred at Bliss Lake to date?
There are pegmatite outcrops that are visible from space. So you have outcrops we've got two that are about 300 meters long. We've now bought very high level satellite imagery that we're cross-referencing against the work that was done by the Northwest Territories, and of course, Canadian Superior, as well as other organizations that spent time there in the 70s have done some work. But from our perspective, we're still determining exactly if any work was done on our asset.
Okay. So, what about infrastructure in the area? What does that look like? What about local communities? Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah. Infrastructure, we're better situated than some of our neighbors, purely because we're closer to the roads. We also have a contiguous asset base, so we have 5 licenses, but it is one big 5,700 hectare package. There is enough sort of room there for you to maneuver and build roads if necessary. So we think from an infrastructure perspective, we're better placed than some of our peers. But I will say from a local community perspective as well, that's something that's very important to us. And it was in Mongolia, it is in the Northwest Territories. In Mongolia, we had individuals that were with the community well before we had anybody collect any samples or turn or drill. And so, you need to build that social license. It's imperative for you to be successful, irrespective of jurisdiction. With the Northwest Territories, as soon as we announced the acquisition, I think it was a Thursday, on Friday morning, I did an interview with Cabin Radio out in Yellowknife to tell our story. And my first sort of piece of messaging there was, we're going to get out there, we're going to meet with the local community, As of this morning, I've already received the necessary contact details of everybody I need to speak with, and I'm planning a trip out there around June 10th, where I'll be meeting with not only the First Nations, but hopefully with some government officials as well.
All right. So just switching over to Mongolia now, and you touched on this during your presentation, but some people here may not be as familiar with the jurisdiction. But can you maybe talk about some of the benefits of operating in Mongolia in terms of permits, government relations, local communities?
Absolutely. Mongolia is a place that we've been in for 14 years as a group now, and we've seen governments changed. We've seen assets that we've developed either exit or come to production, which is a feat in its own regard. We also have the likes of Rio Tinto now pouring massive amounts of cash into that country with Oyu Tolgoi, and the employer that has 15,000 individuals working on their mine. In fact, so much so that when I had the pleasure of, or honor, I should say, of sitting on a table with the CEO of Rio Tinto back in December for a dinner after Mines and Money. And, I asked him, I said, hey, what are you most excited about for the company? And he said, I'm going to save that one for when I'm on the panel. And so when he gets up on the panel, he says the jurisdiction that he's most interested about, or thinks he has that has the most potential, is Mongolia. And that was, to me, it was a great surprise, but something that we've known for a while. But it really hit home for me in March of this year when we had PDAC in Toronto. The Minister of Mining brought his associates and his support, his vice ministers. He also brought the opposition leader of Parliament to Toronto for PDAC with his delegation. And they held a breakfast for all of us issuers that have assets in Mongolia. So Erdene Resources, Step Gold, Ion Energy, Rio Tinto, and a few others were there. And the Minister of Mines stands up and he says, transparency is key, permitting is key, and we want to make sure that we're doing things to incentivize foreign direct investment. And then the opposition leader stands up and says the same thing. If our listeners are in Canada, imagine Trudeau and Jagmeet Singh saying the same thing in the same room. If you're in the U.S., be it the Republicans or the Senate or the Democrats being in the same room saying the same thing. And then following that conversation, the minister came by our booth at PDAC and said, you've met with me in Mongolia 3 times last year. We're now here showing our support. And what I want you to know is that we want you to get to feasibility as quickly as possible because we want to fast track your permitting. It's almost impossible to find any other jurisdiction in the world that'll allow you to move that rapidly.
Yeah, no, definitely. That sounds like sounds like there's a lot of support for the projects in country. So, Ali, 2 large projects. Let's start with Babayol. Your JV agreement and the copper nickel discovery that was made there. So, what are the terms for that? Does the company just have, are they just looking at copper nickel or lithium as well?
So Ranjan Resources is the company that we built a joint venture. It's actually a reciprocal mining rights agreement. It's one of the first of its kind ever to be done here in Canada. And what that means is for all copper or nickel found on Ion's asset, which is Babayul, Ranjan is obligated to spend a certain amount exploring and de-risking that commodity. So copper, nickel, all base metals will fall under Ranjan's exploration remit. However, Ion Energy will get 20% of all proceeds generated from any export of those products should those assets come to production. So, and on the flip side, Ion Energy has an obligation to spend $500,000 over the next 3.5 years on Ranjan's properties to look for lithium. And so if we find lithium on their assets, we keep 80% of the proceeds, they keep 20, and vice versa. So it's really a way for us to not spend shareholder capital on a commodity that the company is not focused on, but yet we get to monetize any proceeds from the sale of those commodities.
Okay, all right. So at Orgaknaran, you've seen good grades there. So during your presentation, you mentioned the test wells. Drilling there has not started yet.
No, so we've completed our 3 water wells. Those are 6-inch tricone bit with 4-inch steel slotted pipes, gravel packed, all the way down to about 350 meters or so, which is sort of the limit that we got from our TEM survey. We did not hit basement in our lithological drilling either, so we know it's open at depth, but we won't do microseismic until we've strengthened the treasury a fair bit. But ultimately, the water wells that have been completed are not test wells. They're simply hydrogeological wells that allow us to collect those brine samples for an inferred resource calculation.
Okay, so on that note, can you talk about your current burn rate and the timing of future capital raises?
Yeah, so the burn rate, we raised $5.75 million, call it 5.2 after all fees, the lawyers, auditors, and everybody else that you have to pay when you do these things. That kept us going for over 2 years, about 2 years and 4 months. In terms of a capital raise, we're with the asset acquisition in Canada, looking to bring in some flow-through funding to help advance that asset. But we will also be doing a back-end equity funding to help advance our assets in Mongolia. So a cash raise is likely going to be announced in short order here, but there will be an equity raise taking place.
Okay, and then, like you said, the resource is still on track or on track for June.
The inferred resource is absolutely on track for June. That has not, no plans have deviated there. Most of that exploration work was prepaid. And the work that's left to be done, which is ultimately building up camp and obtaining brine samples for assays, is very inexpensive.
Okay. All right. So last question here, Ali. I know you touched on this during your presentation, but can you just sum up the upcoming catalysts in the next 6 months?
Absolutely. So our very first catalyst will be Urgak centric, and that will have to do with us providing an inferred resource calculation to market. That's due in June. In July, you'll likely see some news flow from us deploying a team on the Northwest Territory asset to begin some sampling and rock chip sampling to get a better sense of that asset. In August, we're going to spend a fair bit of time moving our inferred resource to measured and indicated. So you can expect measured and indicated in the fall of this year at Urgak. And then we'll commence scoping and as well as, of course, provide various assay results from our Northwest Territories asset. So should we close a significant financing, we'll deploy a fair bit of capital at Babayol, and that'll allow us to get a geophysics survey underway that will ultimately dictate where we're drilling. So there's a lot of exciting news to come. Of course, the most pivotal of which would be that inferred resource at Urgak, and then ultimately the measured and indicated as well.
Well, definitely a lot to look forward to. So that's it for the Q&A portion of the webinar. Ali, thanks a lot for hosting this webinar with us today. Just as a reminder for our audience, our next webinar will feature Power Nickel, and that's tomorrow, May 31st at 2 p.m. Eastern. Thanks for tuning in with us, everyone. Have a great day.